This is why I bring an engineer with me everywhere I go. When Jennifer asked me to do this, what I did was resurrect a DVD that was done by a filmmaker by the name of Robert Muggy. Robert Muggy has done about 10 documentary films on musicians in Louisiana, and in particular New Orleans. So after Hurricane Katrina, as is the case with many documentarians, they were interested in finding out where the musicians were, how they were, and where they had relocated, and then doing interviews with those who remained on the scene. So over the years, we had helped this filmmaker with his recordings, primarily the audio portion, and our radio station and our engineer did a lot of multi-track recording for him. And so while he was visiting on this particular project, I told him that I had gone into New Orleans with my boat, and he took that opportunity to sit by Cypress Lake with me on the UL campus, and I kind of told him what we did. What was nice about it was that I had some photographs, and when he compiled his documentary, he interspersed those photographs to coincide with what I was telling him about our venture into New Orleans. So it's, you know, maybe a few months after Katrina, so my memory was very good at that time as to what we did. So I thought showing the video would not be a bad idea. It tells the story, and it also shows some of the photographs. So what I'd like to do is show the DVD. It's about 18 minutes long, and then if you have any questions about what we did or what happened, I'd be happy to answer that. So that's my deal.
Before we get there, I'd like to have Rob talk to us a little bit about tracking hurricanes and his experiences here. I mean, how long have you been doing the news here or the weather here?
It's been a long time. I'm
Acadiana?
going to have to stand.
Okay.
It's a little weird sitting. Yeah, you sit, moderator sit. I've been tracking storms, I guess, since about 6th grade.
Oh, okay.
I was a weather geek growing up, and I'm originally from the New York area, New York City area, and I pretty much figured probably around the 5th or 6th grade when we had a snowstorm was coming up the East Coast and it looked like it was going to be all rain, and I went to class and I said, man, I think we're going to get all snow on this storm. And sure enough, the next day we got a 1.5 feet of snow and school was closed, and 2 days later coming back to school, everybody wanted to know the next snowstorm was coming. So I kind of got into my niche, and I didn't even know I was going in that direction, and nor did I think I was going to wind up in the television business. I just wanted to work for the National Weather Service, but during the late 70s and the early 80s, I started tracking hurricanes along the East Coast. One of them was Hurricane Bell, a couple of others, but I never thought I'd wind up doing meteorology in the Gulf South. You never know how your story's going to wind up. I went up to upstate New York, got a degree in meteorology, and specialized in lake effect snow. That was my bag. And after I graduated, I joined the ranks of most other degreed meteorologists, being unemployed, but I did wind up working for a nuclear power plant in case there was radiation going to be released. It was my job to drive to the plant and tell people where to evacuate to, which was not the most sexy jobs for a meteorologist, nor is it a great job when your office is inside of 9 feet of concrete. There's no windows in a nuclear power plant. So a few years after that, after a very tough winter in upstate New York, I sent resumes out, and I wound up in the Houston area working for a consulting firm, and they hired me as a hurricane forecaster, forecasting for hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico. Actually, it was a worldwide job. It was a marine and industrial meteorological position. And I came down to the Gulf South in 1985, and I was here probably in Houston for about a week or two, and Hurricane Danny came in. And then a few weeks later it was Elena, then a few weeks after that it was another storm, and it was one. There were 4 storms in the Gulf that year. And that was my first taste of hurricanes, and their unpredictability. One of the things we used to do, the name of the company I worked for was Wilkins Weather Technologies, is that you get 15, 20 weather guys in an office, you start betting on landfalls and where they're going to be. And I can remember with Hurricane Juan, I took Mobile, and it made several loops, came to Mobile, I collected my money, I went to bed that night after working a 16-hour shift, and the next day I come in and the boss is looking at me like, where the heck have you been? Mind you, we get in at 3:30 in the morning, it's like, what? The storm's back offshore, it's regenerating. So it made 3 landfalls, so it was a wash on the bat. But that was one of my first experiences with the unpredictability of tropical systems, whether it's the end of the season or the beginning of the season. And what you learn over the years is that these storms are very different. Each and every one is unique. They're like snowflakes. They react to the atmosphere in different ways. Some storms are more possibly more influenced by mid-level winds or upper-level winds or low-level shear, and depending on the time of the year and the surrounding meteorology. So it becomes a very interesting fight, and the more you learn about forecasting in general and hurricane forecasting, the more you realize that you have no business doing it because it's a very tough job. Now, experiences over the years, my first big hurricane that I've actually experienced the winds were Andrew back in 1992. And then after that, I don't know how many tropical storms rolled through here, and then we had the big storms. We had Lily in 03, and then the 05 storms, and then the 07 08 storms of Gustav and Ike. And each hurricane season, when I was younger, I was gung-ho, ready to cover those storms. And, you talk to everybody culturally. Everybody can tell you about Audrey. People can tell you about Hurricane Danny. You can talk about the Claudettes and the Carmens and the Hildas and the Betsies that have rolled through this area. And it is quite exciting. But then as you get older, you have a house, you have a family, you have stuff you need to worry about, it's not as much fun. And, especially if you're caretaking parents, you have to worry about what you're going to do with your parents. It is a lot of consternation. But it's also, there's an undeniable energy that we get from watching these storms. There's a lot of interest. And, in this day and age, we can tell you almost 2 weeks out that something's going to be up out in the Atlantic or in the Caribbean. And a week out, we can say, hey, we may have a player in the Gulf of Mexico. And leading up to that storm that possibly will threaten the Louisiana coastline, I can remember this with Rita. We were tracking this for a better part of a week. And then the reality is like, my gosh, this is actually coming on through. We're going to have to deal with this. And there is still excitement the day that the storm comes in, and then the evening, and then when you're going through the storm, it's not only a physical battle, but it's a psychological battle. And that's what kind of I try to, not to wax too poetic on, but you see every storm band that comes in, it's like, oh my gosh, this is getting worse. Oh my gosh, this is even worse. And then it dies down. It's like, okay, maybe that was the worst part of the storm. And then another band comes in 20 or 30 minutes later, and it is a psychological battle when you're riding out a storm. There's no denying it. And you're worried about not only your house, your neighbor, and what's going on down along the coast. And then it pushes you back into the Stone Age. When you lose power, you lose communication, you lose cell phone, all of a sudden, all of a sudden we're pushed back to primeval times. So that's my perspective anyway, and at least over the years of covering the storms. But hopefully this will be an informal talk, because I can just go on and on, obviously.
Well, I'm curious though, I have a couple questions for you, and I know the audience does as well, but I would like to know exactly, I have a hurricane tracking chart at home, but it's pretty rudimentary, and stick pins in it and things like that.
Right.
And I'm sure the technology is much different for you. So I'd like you to just kind of explain exactly what goes into tracking hurricanes and how the technology has changed since you began.
Well, the main thing that we do is we track the center of the circulation of the storm. A hurricane is what I call is a thunderstorm party gone wild. Basically, thunderstorms cluster up together. There is what's called vorticity, a little turning tendency, and a micro low pressure system will develop. And what makes a hurricane very unique, first off, is that it's a low pressure system, but we deal with low pressure systems all the time. But as you go vertically, there's a high pressure system sitting over it, which acts as an exhaust, and it's unique to the tropics. And backing further on up, tropical systems are a safety valve. They take excessive heat. They run off the heat of the ocean, the latent heat of evaporation. They take heat away from the equatorial regions, and they distribute them in northern latitudes. So they are a safety valve that is built into our global dynamic weather systems that take that heat and redistribute it so the tropics don't get too crazy. And unfortunately, though, we're in between point A and point B, from the origination to where the storm winds down, and there's a lot of kinetic energy involved with those storms. But as these thunderstorms gather in intensity and develop a circulation, if there's the right amount of atmospheric conditions where this can develop fully as a tropical system, it grows obviously to a tropical storm and a hurricane. Now, we don't officially classify a system until we see what's called a closed circulation. So we talk about the hurricane hunters going out and investigating these tropical waves or disturbance in the Gulf of Mexico. And if they find a distinct closed circulation where winds are circulating around the center point area, that's when we identify that system as a tropical depression, or it could be a tropical storm if winds are greater than 39 miles an hour. And obviously then you get up to hurricane strength 74 and greater, and then we categorize our hurricanes up through 5 based on the intensity of the winds. But mind you, once you get over 50 or 60 mile an hour winds, even though you may jump a category, for every 10 miles an hour you increase your wind strength, you more than square the damage potential. And then if you put it in an area, a storm in an area where there's a lot of debris flowing, you can exponentially increase the damage potential of a storm just looking at the winds, not even the storm surge. So we track the storms by the center of the storm. In the olden days, pre-satellite, we based our stuff on ship observation, island observations, or wherever the storm's affected. In the satellite days, and we started tracking these storms with greater interest, particularly during World War II, when typhoons really interrupted operations in the Western Pacific warfare. So during the 1950s, there was more meteorological observations. There was better methodologies for disseminating the weather information via radio. And then right around 1960 or 61, satellite imagery became a big boon for us as meteorologists, because now we could see the storm even if it wasn't affecting anybody, it was in the open ocean. We could at least see the cloud mass. And during the course of the last 40 or 50 years, the satellites are getting better. We're able to not only look at the picture, but remotely interrogate the storm via these satellites and get derived wind fields, get derived moisture, and also understand how high the cloud tops and what's going on these storms, and looking at it like an X-ray, kind of dissecting the storm. But by far right now, our biggest conduit of information comes from the hurricane hunters that go out and fly into the storms. And 10 or 15 years ago, they wouldn't fly a storm that was 1,000 miles away from St. Thomas, but now they do with WC-130s, and they drop these dropsondes out of the plane, and these dropsondes, the data now is increasingly higher resolution. So if a storm is on the verge of category 3 or 4, we know it almost instantaneously now. And the moment that a meteorologist on that plane gets the readings, I receive that information at the station via satellite about 30 seconds later. So that's kind of how I get an inside track on, hey, the storm is deepening, the pressure's dropping, the winds, look at the winds that they're recording. And sure enough, usually the Hurricane Center, the National Hurricane Center, which puts out bulletins, will make the official forecast.
Okay.